My name is Terry Wheeler, I live in Carluke. I was brought up in the East of House for 14 years, so I know all about navigation. My question is this: I'm a yes voter, no two ways about it. But unfortunately, guys, see, when we get our independence, we've not really got true independence because we're still going to have the elephant in the room, which is the monarchy, which we need to abolish. And that is going to keep us down. You're talking about 1 million kids in poverty. What kind of ideal is that? We've still got a monarchy with an aristocracy supporting them. We need to get rid of them. You get rid of the House of Lords, yeah, but you haven't got rid of that upper class.
Can you phrase it as a question so we can ask our panel?
Well, we talked about a modern Scotland. A modern Scotland, we need to be almost like a republic. We have to have it. Or you're not going to get real, true independence.
Thank you, sir.
And you will have a foreign monarch on the 19th when we get independence.
Thank you, sir. Why don't we let Craig start us off since he's voting tonight?
You hear me okay? Yeah. To be fair, keeping the monarchy doesn't seem to have hindered Canada's independence, or New Zealand or Australia. Because basically we've got a constitutional monarchy is constitutionally obliged to not have any power. So it doesn't actually affect us. But what independence gives us, this is crucial to just about every aspect of the running of our country. It gives us the right to ask ourselves, do we want a monarchy? If we vote no, we do not have that right. After the 18th, if we vote yes, we can have this discussion.
One of the important things we must understand is that we're not voting for the government, the Scottish Government white paper. This is not an election. You know, the white paper put forward ideas. I don't agree with lots of them. I'm a Republican. I do not believe that we should have a hereditary head of state. I wish we had some hereditary football players, you know. We don't. But once we pass the independence test, we move into the other great civic movement interest, where you'll be coming back to meetings like this to talk about the Constitution. And we will have to decide. Now, the Constitution isn't an academic thing. A written Constitution means that the people have got power, no the politicians. Because the politicians are bound to work within the Constitution. And if they work out with it, anybody, single person or group, can go to the Supreme Court and call them to book if they are not obeying the Constitution. So we will actually have a great debate after this. There will be no choices made. Do you want the present monarch to be the head of state? You know the state is a monarch, by the way. You know, south of the border, she will remain the monarch. You can't have two monarchs in Scotland, and the people are the monarchs in Scotland. So even if they vote to keep Elizabeth Windsor, as I call the lady, even if they vote to keep her, the fact is that she'll just be a titular head of state with no power whatsoever. You cannot imagine a situation where the Scottish Parliament passes an act and then the government minister is on the sleeper at Edinburgh and goes down to London to ask her to stamp it. That cannot happen. So, you know, you're worried about almost the English hierarchical system being visited up here. Even if we vote for her, it will happen.
And the gentleman with the wonderful moustache.
Good evening, folks. I'm Donald Walker. I'd like to extend Jim Sillars' comment on Clyde oil and gas. And I think we should know about the oil lying off the west coast of Scotland, which extends up from the Clyde, all the way up to Shetland, and all the way out to Rockall. So we're talking about 1 billion barrels a day potential from South Atlantic margin oil. And go back to Jim's comment about the Clyde Shell, I believe, wanted to develop a refinery on the Ayrshire coast, and the MOD stopped that happening just as they stopped the drilling for oil. If we vote for independence on the 18th, then we can invigorate the whole of the west of Scotland, all the way up the west coast, the shipyards in Scotland, and get the refinery that we should have had years ago.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a lady at the back, and why you put the sunglasses? If we can keep to questions rather than statements, please.
Thank you very much. My name's Bev, and I'm not from Carluke, but I'm actually, I don't know. So I've actually travelled quite a lot to hear these speakers because I'd really like to get to the bottom of this and make an informed decision. So I've heard Blair Jenkins and Nicola Sturgeon, I've heard Jim Murphy, I've even heard George Galloway, and I've even heard Tommy Sheridan, and I'm here tonight particularly to hear Mr. Sillars because I'm sort of that generation that he was talking about. But the one thing that I would like to ask is, I've got an awful lot to be thankful for to the NHS. If it wasn't for the NHS, I wouldn't actually be sitting here tonight. So obviously that's a subject that's very close to my heart. But there's a couple of things that I can't quite work out. One of the things is, why are over 60% of the Scottish doctors going to vote no? That was in the last poll in the BMG on the 16th of August. Why also has there been about 400 million spent on private health care since 2007, and only the other day the Greater Glasgow has engaged Weight Watchers to look after the obese clinics? So these are things that, there's lots of questions I would love to ask and lots of subjects, but I realise that's very greedy, so I'm trying just to get some answers on that. And then as far as TTIP is concerned, I know this has been a great worry for Dr. Whitford, who I have a great deal of admiration for. But the other thing that I noticed that in 2013, because I've really tried hard to look at this in a proper manner, that a statement was made from the Scottish Government that they actually welcomed this because this would be good for Scotland. And it's just that I would like those questions answered, please. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Some of these questions, first of all, thank you for coming. We're really pleased that you had the courage to come and to speak up and answer your question. Some of the issues that you're addressing are more about current government policy than about independence per se, so I'm going to be mean and hand it over to Aileen to have the first response to you. There were a few things there. There's things about privatisation in general, current practices in terms of privatisation, and the impact of the European American agreement that is pending at the moment.
On the issue that you raised around the 60% of doctors, I have a feeling, and I don't know the particular figures, but I have a feeling that was based on a 14% response rate to that questionnaire or that survey that they carried out. So I don't know whether it's entirely true to say that 60% of all doctors have said that they're going to vote no, because I think there's actually probably quite a lot of doctors, and you've certainly named Philip Whitford there, who's been one of the very prominent figures within the campaign for a yes vote, articulating very clearly why we need independence to protect our NHS. So I think beneath some of the headlines, and we've discovered that actually 14% of the doctors were the ones that responded. So I think we can put that to maybe one side for now. The healthcare in Scotland, yes, Jim articulated it well as well. We need to have control of the budget as well as the policy making levers to make sure we can properly control our NHS. And there's an awful lot of things that do happen in the NHS to try and control things like waiting times as well. And that's where you see sometimes the engagement and deployment of private firms to be able to help cope, to make sure people get the services they need when they require it, to make sure they get better or get the healthcare that they absolutely require. And I know myself, I'm about to use the NHS quite considerably when I gave birth to my wee one in the end of December. But I've seen sometimes somewhere they had listed the costings of that. If you were to be a parent in America, the costings of that process are horrendous to have a child in America. So at least in Scotland, and at least under the NHS, that is something that we can value, we can appreciate, we can protect, to make sure that people don't have to face those onerous bills just to get that basic requirement in life, which is a healthcare service free at the point of need. And I think you're talking about some of the things that Aileen had mentioned in the Parliament around TTIP, but certainly in terms of our wholesale ambition, which is to keep the NHS as a public service, a public good that is free at point of entry, we absolutely need independence to make sure that we have the control over our NHS, and that will go if the UK government has that power over the NHS. If we don't vote yes in September, we need to make sure that we've got control so that we can protect our NHS. That will simply not happen if we vote no, because we have ultimately the opportunity to free up that market beyond our ability to protect it. So I think for those reasons, the budget reasons, to make sure that we can protect our budget, deploy our budget in a way that does protect the NHS, we need to vote yes. To make sure we can protect the founding principles of the NHS, we need to vote yes. And to make sure that we can improve the NHS as well, we need to vote yes, because if we don't have the budget power behind us, then that will just erode and erode, and we'll have to cope with the budgetary pressures. And that means as well that the budgetary pressures not just affect the NHS, but education and all the other things that the current Parliament has devolved power over. So I think, Philippa Whitford is certainly someone you should listen to, because she's there at the very heart of the NHS, and she's telling us very clearly that to protect the service that she chose to be part of, we need a yes vote in September.
Like yourself, I wouldn't be here without the NHS. I was born 9 weeks premature with very sick wee boy at the time. Just to take your figure of the public-private health spending, there is a difference between purchasing some private services, either to buy specialist services or to cope with spikes in demand, and what they're doing in England, where they are actually selling off hospitals that we, the taxpayer, pay for and giving them to private companies wholesale. To take your figure of 400 million over the last few years, that actually, I looked into the figures, and this actually represents a year-on-year decrease in spending once you account for inflation, so it's not as if it's going rapidly out of control up here. I actually took this point to the No campaign on our Facebook page, and they responded by deleting my comment and blocking my account.
We already and have always used a private sector in Naiveden's NHS. Chemists, for example, are private companies we use for prescriptions. GPs actually are private contractors. They're not employees of the NHS. That was the compromise that Naivedden faced in 1948. But of course, it's not a matter of saying we hand over to the GPs and we hand over to the chemists. There's a very substantial degree of control exercised by the public sector National Health Service over those two private elements. But I have some knowledge of what happened in Edinburgh, for example. The PFI, the Royal Infirmary in Edinburgh, was built under PFI. Probably one of the worst deals anywhere in Western Europe. And one of the factors in it, when they transferred from the old Royal to the new Royal, was a massive loss of beds, which meant in some clinical areas a build-up of waiting lists. And I think quite rightly there's a relatively small private hospital, I think it's now called, well, it was always called the Murrayfield anyway in Edinburgh, where I think quite sensibly the government said, right, we'll pay you for doing a number of operations to bring the waiting list down. And that wasn't, they weren't bound ideological. If somebody had a capacity to help them out, they could do so. But the 400 million has to be seen against the total budget of the NHS in Scotland of 12 million. So we've got to get that in proportion. on this trade and investment partnership being negotiated between, it's not the UK, it's the European Union and the United States. I've got some, I'm sorry to take so long, but I've got some experience in relation to the World Trade Organisation, because I used to be the Assistant Secretary General at the Arab British Chamber of Commerce, and one of our functions was to advise the Arab countries, particularly the private sector, on the development of the World Trade Organisation and their applications to join. This TTIP will be very similar. It will become a rules-based organisation, where if one element of it, one partner, thinks the other partner is not acting correctly, we'll be able to take them to an arbitration panel and they'll have to live by that particular decision. It's a great thing for lawyers. But in the World Trade Organisation, when any country joined, they always had reserved positions. For example, on tariffs, they would maybe say, well, we'll lower our tariffs but not below 12%, where it used to be 30%. What will have to happen in this negotiation, which is in its early stages, is that countries like ours will have to tell our European negotiators there are certain matters reserved. And we would obviously say the National Health Service, that remains a public factor and not open to market forces. If, however, we remain part of the United Kingdom, even if the Holyrood government, the devolved government, says we want to hold on to a public health service, under that agreement, I'm quite sure, the Americans will say, Scotland is part of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is a single market. So you can't have a wee bit in your market not open to us. You know, we're entitled, and I'm sure if they went to an arbitration panel, they would in fact win. So the only real guarantee that we can have of keeping our National Health Service in public hands is by independence. That then allows us, as an independent government in the EU, to tell them, by the way, when they negotiate, we have a reserve point in that. I understand that other countries like Germany are actually doing that on certain aspects. And that's how that international negotiation works. It's not you don't end up with an absolute black and white agreement. There are all sorts of shades of grey and reservations in it. But at the end of the day, the only guarantee we would have is if we're independent. That way, if I come back to the point I was trying to make, we've got power. If we remain part of the UK, we ain't got it at all.
The lady that was asking the question. Yeah?
Yes, that's very interesting. What really prompted me to ask about TTIP was the sort of negative way that Dr. Whitfield actually portrayed it and said that if this actually came into being, then it could be privatisation for NHS Scotland by the back door because of the fact that America and the EU are the biggest trading partners. And that's why I actually asked the question. The other things that I was worried about is the fact too that we've failed to meet our waiting time targets again in Lanarkshire, both at Wishaw and at Hare Myers. We failed to meet it, even although the target time was reduced. And I don't know if the people in Carluke read the story 2 weeks ago, but the lady from Rigside that had to take a taxi to take our daughter to get an out-of-hours doctor. She couldn't get one in Lanark, she couldn't even get one in Wishaw, and she had to go to Hare Myers to be taxied there from Rigside, which cost £150, which, as she said, mercifully the NHS paid for her. So these are all wee things that I worry about, and as I say, that's why I came here tonight, as I've gone to other meetings, just to ask and find out if anyone could sort of help me speak up my mind. That's a dreadful issue.
Can I just say, if you want to, particularly about out of hours service, I know that's been something I've had a number of meetings with the NHS board about in Lanarkshire as well. If there's something you want to maybe at the end, there's a very specific Clydesdale issue, and the rurality of Clydesdale has a real significant kind of impact on the out of hours services, then I'm happy to catch up with you at the end of the meeting if that's something you would like to do.
Yeah, can I just come back to the question of power and give you an analogy of what happened when we joined the European Economic Community. And it's very important for Scots to understand this. In those kind of international negotiations, you always have a throwaway card. I mean, it's give and take, and some you get, and you have to give away. In those negotiations, the throwaway card was Scottish fisheries. Now, this is not an invention by me. I've told you I worked for the Arab British Chamber of Commerce. The chairman was Jim Pryor, who was the agricultural minister. You know, Jim and I got on fine. He was a Tory and Labour, but you know, we got on fine. And you know, in our private conversations, you know, years after the event, Jim told me, yes, the fisheries affected Hull and the southwest of England as well, but us disproportionately was one of the negotiating throwaway cards when we were entering into negotiations in the EEC. And you can bet your bottom dollar that if we vote no and we remain part of the UK market, we will be one of the throwaway cards when it comes to the NHS, because we'll have no power to do anything about it. That, you know, we don't have a perfect health service, and you're never going to get it, because there's no way a national health service can consistently meet the growing needs as people get older and medical science gets better. Politicians don't tell you this, but it's true. Health is rationed. You either ration it with waiting lists or you ration it in money. That's basically the score. It's not, politicians are not really very happy telling you that. But if you think about it, there's an exponential demand on health care and a limited amount of money, even whatever you're independent or not. And so you're not going to get an absolutely perfect health service. But if you look at how it performs, you know, you're talking about 99%. It performs very well inside our community. That doesn't mean we shouldn't criticise it. I'm not in favour of saying we love the National Health Service, then maybe you'll ever say anything about it. The best way to maintain a public service is actually to apply critique time and time again, and I think the lady's quite right in raising those issues.
Hello, my name's Christine Lees, and I live in the sheltered housing in Carluke, and part of the Kipton Court. And I'm not worried about my pension or about this DLA allowance, but a lot of the people that I live beside will say, why are you voting yes? I said, well, I listen to a lot of debates on the television, and I truly believe what they're saying is true. And I said, well, what about our pensions and what about our DLA? I said, I think if you listen to the debates, you'll find the answer is given to you in the debates. But it's not past me, and I don't know how to answer them.
So you'd like something to take back to talk with your neighbours about?
I would, so I don't
Yeah, fantastic. Who would like to start us off? Aileen?
Pensions, yes. In fact, we've got leaflets as well. There's leaflets about pensions, so if you want to take any of them round some of your friends or colleagues as well, feel free. We'll make sure you get a bundle of them that crisply tells you why we need independence to protect our pensions. Now, the total expenditure of social protection, which covers pensions and broader welfare, has been lower in Scotland than the rest of the UK, so we can more than afford to pay our way when it comes to social protection, which includes pensions. And also having the control of pensions in Scotland will give us an opportunity to use the levers to better reflect society in Scotland. So we've seen the increase in age for their state pension brought about by the government down in the UK, but we've got in Scotland, unfortunately, lower life expectancy. So we get hit in Scotland because people aren't living long enough to claim back their pension. Sometimes they're not even living long enough to even get to pension age. So at least within Scotland we can have pension policies that better reflect the society that we live in, and making sure that people get what they deserve and what we've all paid into the pot. And also, it's important to remember that in general, Scotland puts more into the UK than we get back as well. So we can afford it. People have said we can be a successful country. David Cameron said we could be a successful independent country. So we can afford to look after our pensioners, and we can afford to look after the most vulnerable in society as well, as opposed to seeing them getting hammered through things like the bedroom tax, which incidentally, to mitigate against the worst impacts of the bedroom tax, the Scottish Government had to use £50 million of our fixed block grant to try and help those most vulnerable people in Scotland who have been affected by it. So it was voted against in Westminster by most of Scotland's MPs, but it was still implemented across the UK, still implemented in Scotland. The Scottish Government had to use £50 million to mitigate against it, but that's £50 million that we could have spent on other things. So it's far better to be in control of all the policy making levers that can allow us to make and create welfare systems that are fairer, that protect and help the most vulnerable, but also we can afford to pay pensions, and pensions will not be affected with independence. If anything, we'll have the powers to make improvements to it.
Yes.
We have the answer.
Tell your neighbours to read the Sunday Post this Sunday. Because there'll be information in it. But I'll give you some just going back. In January 2013, the Department for Work and Pension issued the following statement, and I quote from them: "If Scotland does become independent, this will have no effect on your state pension. You will continue to receive it just as you do at present." And the reason is that you and I, at our age, we've paid our national insurance contributions, and we are legally entitled, whether we stay in independent Scotland or independent Portugal or independent Spain, we get the pension that we have in fact paid for. That is the position. I think it's absolutely despicable what the No campaign have done. I heard Darling at it this morning on radio about the uncertainty over pensions. There isn't any. I'm a state pensioner. I'm as relaxed as can be about my pension. Because I kind of got to get it. They've told me down south. And, you know, they will deliver my pension as they are legally entitled. And it really is shocking that they've tried to frighten old people into a belief that it is in fact in jeopardy. So tell them
If you could go next to the gentleman with the beard and the glasses in the front row.
Just very quickly, Aileen mentioned life expectancy there. Unfortunately, Scotland does have a lower average life expectancy than the rest of the UK. What that means is, if you're a man, over your lifetime, you will be paid about £13,000 less in your state pension than the average UK figure. If you're a woman, it's about £19,000. You still pay the same national insurance though, even when you're DQ subsidised down south.
Gentleman here asked me to ask a question on his behalf. And very brief question. He is a former member of and has relatives in the Scottish Border Regiment who are apparently being posted to Ireland within the next few weeks over the course of the referendum. He wants to be assured that the members of that regiment will be able to vote, particularly yes, I presume, in the referendum.
And I have no authority to comment on the Electoral Commission, but if you're entitled to vote, then you vote. I don't think there's any question about that whatsoever. I would assume if there is a problem, any serving soldier could raise it with the Electoral Commission and say we need ballot boxes in Ireland because we are entitled to vote in Scotland if they live in Scotland. If they don't live in Scotland, they're not entitled to vote. You know, that's a fact whether you're in a regiment or you're not in a regiment. But if they're registered to vote in Scotland, as I know some of my pals' sons are, then the Electoral Commission should make sure that they are in fact able to vote despite them travelling outside the country. Because, you know, that's happened before. Forces have always been accommodated in those circumstances. So the only advice we can give is that that soldier should in fact ask his commanding officer what arrangements have been made for me to vote if I'm moved from Ireland to Ireland before the 18th. I mean, it's an army responsibility and an electoral commission responsibility. And when I get back to Edinburgh on Saturday, I'll email the electoral commission and I'll ask them, what are you doing about this? I don't have authority to say they'll do this, that, and the next time, but I can certainly ask them what they're going to do about it.
Jim's right. There are infrastructure in place. I'm afraid I don't know the specific details, but your colleagues are entitled to a service vote. It's similar to a postal vote, but it's very specific for armed forces and civil servants posted abroad, especially at short notice. There will be mechanisms within the regiment to raise it. There will be mechanisms within the Electoral Commission to get that sorted. Sooner rather than later, if they can, if they're not sure who to go through the military route, if they contact the Electoral Commission as soon as possible, they'll be able to guide them.
Now I can go back to the gentleman with the glasses and the beard in the front row. Got you there.
This is for Mr. Sillars. My name's John McGurk. Do you think it's really necessary, if we get independence, to cut corporation tax?
No, I don't. I keep saying I'm not voting for the white paper. I'm voting to be able to do something different once we're independent. I would certainly, the book I've written, I hope everyone would read it and make me a fortune. In the book I've written, I've divided capital. This is we're into socialist theory now. But I've divided capital between what I call big capital and local capital.
Yes.
Local capital is the hairdresser, the lassie that runs a cafe, the laundrettes and things like that, or the very small companies that operate in our communities, that pose no threat to us whatever, and actually play a significant role, because we've got 340,000 small, medium-sized enterprises in Scotland employing about 1.3 million people. Now, if we can engineer the mechanics of finances, even if half of them employed one more person, we're a long way into job creation and solving the unemployment problem. They have a major difficulty with the banks. There's a cafe I know where the woman running it would like to expand. She needs to borrow about 30,000. Now, there's no way a bank will look at that. First of all, there's no bonus in 30,000. I tell her to phone them up and ask for 30 million and she get an interview. When you get 30 million, then she get the interview. And I've argued that, this is where we come to imagination, that we should actually create an SME bank, where it would be like a credit union in a sense. The SMEs would pay into it, so would the government, you build up its capital, and they would go to a bank who understood that 20 or 30,000 was important for the development of their particular small company. The big companies, no. I see no reason whatsoever for us to give these huge companies, that includes the oil companies, a 3% or even a 1%. They're doing okay, let me tell you. The total amount in cash available to big capital in business is 750 billion. Folk don't know that. There's 750 billion sitting in cash that they're not investing because they can't see a progressive growth pattern in the British economy for some time to come. Now, why would you give them a cut in their corporation tax when actually in cash terms they're extremely rich? So these will be the great debates. Once we pass the 18th, then we'll have a debate. I'm in the SNP at the present time. I don't want Aileen to report this back. I don't intend SNP in the first independence election. I'm looking for a socialist home to plant myself in.
And the lady goes, look, sorry, it's the gentleman behind her and then the lady. The gentleman with the blue shirt.
My name's Archie and I come to Carluke. It's about the currency. I know it's an ongoing thing, but I think it's one of the and most important thing about independence. Now I know Mr. Sillars doesn't want Scotland to use the pound, but the way things is going, it looks as if it's a certainty if we get independence, we're going to use the pound. Now I looked up things in the internet, and what it says is we could use the pound, but you'll not be able to use any notes, you'll not be able to print any notes because there will be illegal tender. We won't be able to get any insurance, car, anything else that you regard from other parts of the United Kingdom.
Okay, I think we've got the gist of that one.
Well, as I say, it becomes, it'll be null and void. You'll be able to use the coin because there'll no change of coin. So you can go with bucket-free coins to get one or so, but they'll not take any of the money, although they don't, some places don't take the money.
So your question is, will we be able to use our paper money?
Never take the pound.
Yeah? Will we be able to use our paper money?
This is a £10 note printed by the Royal Bank of Scotland.
Yes, but is it serious?
Well, it's a promissory note.
Who guarantees that?
In order to print this note, the Royal Bank of Scotland can't just print it on a whim. They have to give £10 to the Bank of England to do it. There's about £4 billion of Scottish money sitting in the Bank of England vaults securing these. If Westminster decides it's not letting us have the pound, we get that £4 billion back, please. If we want to keep using the pound and they block access to the Bank of England, we'll buy off the international money markets. Thank you. Zurich and New York will be very glad to have our business. Or that would be nice if capitals set up their own currency. The choices are there. I think you said currency, it's a great debate. It's actually just about the smallest issue possible. We have all of the options.
Do you think that when a Japanese group come to play golf in St Andrews, they phone George Osborne to ask if he can use the pound? Of course they don't. When you've gone to Spain, do you phone the central bank in Frankfurt and ask if you can use euros? Of course you don't. When you have an international tradable currency, dollar, pound, yen and the euro, anybody all over the world can use them, and they do. Nobody can stop us using the pound sterling. I don't agree with the currency union, as the man knows. But I'm telling you, given the rattle of the financial markets in the last 2 or 3 days, don't be surprised at 10:01 if Alex Salmon gets a phone call from Downing Street saying, I think we better have a chat. Because Alex is dead right. I don't agree with it. I don't want it. But Alex is dead right. The currency union is more in their favour than it is in ours. And this is the reason. We export more than we import. So we have a balance of payments surplus. They import more than they export. If you extract our surplus away from that, they're left in an even more vulnerable position than they are at the present time. So I think Alec is going to get a phone call. It might not be at 1:01, but it'll not be that long after it. They have a problem. They said they're going to veto. So they will have to do a U-turn. But when 3 of them say that, a U-turn is much easier. Because one can't say yaboo to the other, they're all turning together. So that's that. If in fact they decide that they're going to cut their own throats, what we do is we use the pound for 2 years. that we use it as our currency, no problem whatsoever. Insurance companies will take the money because it's valid currency. And then and during that 2 years, giving them time to sort of reconsider, then we set up our own central bank and we produce our own money. There's nothing unusual in that. This piece of paper here is what the economists call fiat money. It is paper without any intrinsic value whatsoever. The day and hour you go into a shop and they don't believe that's of any value, they'll not take it. Or you don't believe it, you'll not take it either in your pay pack. This is fiat money, printing it, Singapore, Hong Kong, Uganda, Kenya, everybody did it, no bother at all. Setting up a central bank's no problem. The great thing, if we're forced into our own currency, is this. Because we export more than we import, we will get in massive amounts of foreign reserves. We'll be selling oil in US dollars, and we'll be selling vast amounts of the whisky, for example, in different currencies as well. So the Scottish Central Bank will be underpinned by very substantial reserves. There will be a management problem, and that will be the Scottish currency will tend to rise in value, and if we want it 1-to-1 for sterling for tradable purposes, we will have to manage that by interest rates. And Alec was quite right when he told Darwin, that's our preferred option, fair enough, but we have B, C and D are all viable, no problem at all. And you're quite right. In the sort of priorities in people's minds just now, when you mention currency, they go, God, we've had enough, we can't all do that. It's the National Health Service getting rid of the Tories. It's one of the top ones. And I'm one favour of that.
Okay, I've got lots of hands up.
Amanda, just to add, it was the Fiscal Commission working group that came up with the different options as well, so you can check all the different options that are there, and it is primarily the option of the share currency that Alex Salmond is wanting to pursue because it seems to be in the best interest. I think it's worth separating out now the discussion that's happening, which is fought because it's a political debate that's happening, and the pragmatic decisions and discussions that are going to have to take place between the 19th of September and the next election for a Scottish government in an independent Scotland. And all the other thing as well, Craig's got tenner, Jim's got £20, I've got some Goldman's. The coffees are on these guys after the debate.
That's because I've got the same pension.
I've now got lots of people lined up, so you can put your hands down. Let's do the next 4 people that I've got in my head, and then I'll ask people to put their hands up again. First one is lady. Is it lady at the back? I can't see very well. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Suzanne. I've come all the way from Blantyre tonight with my good friend to help persuade to vote yes. I came prepared with questions. I was not right in the head by Mr. Sillars, being one of the generation that were born to fail and worked in education all my life. I thought you were very, very negative about what's happened over the years. We do have something to be proud of. Also proud of this lady because I went to Wishaw too, hospital, and they saved my life. They did extremely well. But my concern at the end of my life is about my pensions. And as you told me tonight, I won't get the benefit of all of my pensions because I'll run out of steam. But I really would like to know, because you confirmed that Westminster are committed to backing our pensions, if so for how long, and I've been informed that future pensions will dependent upon a huge increase in immigrants who will be the taxpayers carrying the independent Scotland into the future and be the supporters of the majority of people that are much younger than we here. Thank you.
Okay, so there's another question on pensions there with the addition of are our pensions dependent on immigration. Were any of the other questions wanting to ask something related to pensions? No? Okay, we'll just finish that one off then, and then we'll come to the gentleman down here who's been waiting patiently very long.
Just on the immigration point, the numbers are that to keep up with our demographic changes, we would need to increase net migration from 22,000 a year to 24,000 a year. It's not a massive increase, it's about 5 people a day or something like that. And also doesn't necessarily mean immigrants, it's net migration. You can also achieve this by encouraging expat Scots to return to jobs that they had to leave Scotland to find, or encouraging them to not have to leave in the first place.
On the pension, they are committed to paying my pension until I die.
Yep.
And I have a parliamentary pension from my time at Westminster, and they're committed to paying that to me until I die as well. Whether I live in Scotland, Spain, Portugal, Germany, or any other. There's one country, I think, where that's not permitted. I don't understand why. But if I go to Portugal and I decide I'm going to live there, my parliamentary pension is paid to me irrespective of where I live. And that's exactly the same with my state pension. They are legally obliged to pay me.
The lady mentioned something I didn't really catch, but about education, talking positively about education services, the NHS as well. Of course we want to talk positively about both of those things and all of those things, and Scotland had a good story to tell about education and the health service, about how we can protect it. And I think that's one of the key arguments though for independence, because if Scotland can do a good job over the things that we have devolved competency over, then why not defence, then why not the economy, why not the welfare state and other things that are currently reserved to Westminster. I think the fact that we have done not too badly with the powers that we've got just shows that we are capable of having control over everything to move our country forward in the way that we want to do it. And I think that's a key reason why people should vote yes.
And the gentleman who Greg, who's been waiting patiently for so long. Next to you, John.
Hi, my name is Campbell. Bruce. Aileen is. Is it a way I'm not sure. Yeah. Living wage. I heard it was actually knocked back. Why was it knocked back, and will it actually come into effect?
The Scottish Government already paid a living wage to the people who were within the government, people who were on the lowest wage and they increased the living wage. The Scottish Government has already been doing the living wage for the people that they have a control and responsibility for some time now. The reason around the legislation that was taken forward fairly recently in the Scottish Parliament that wasn't passed by the Scottish Parliament is because it wasn't deemed to be competent that that could be the case. But what we've outlined in our white paper is that we want to make sure that the minimum wage rises in line with inflation at the very least, but also to consider the living wage as well, about how do we make sure that's a reality in Scotland. And there's one, Nicola Sturgeon is particularly keen on this, and there's a Fair Working Commission that's proposed within the white paper about looking at the cost of living, looking at wages, and making sure that we can get a situation where it isn't a low wage economy in Scotland, that we're not seeing people who are working damn hard and never getting out of the bit because their families are still living in poverty, they're having to go to food banks. That's the opportunity that we have with independence, is to look at all these things and try and move our country in a different way and move it forward in a different way so that people can work and get the reward that they deserve, which is to allow them to live as comfortably as they can. We have done what we can with the powers that we've got, but we want to go further, and that's been set out within the white paper. It allows the people who are accusing the Scottish Government of going back on the living wage is the Labour Party. They were in control of that policy for 13 years when they had power at Westminster. They've been in charge of South Lanarkshire Council for a number of years as well, and they don't have a great record in terms of the payment towards, particularly towards the people that are women in South Lanarkshire. So I think, with independence we can move our country forward in a way that we want to, which will allow us to create the equality that I think we all seek.
We have to tackle inequality, and you have to have positive policies to do that. I mean, I would advocate that the public sector and everyone who supplies the public sector, that means private companies who get contract from the public sector, would be required to apply as a minimum the living wage. That's where we're going to start. But we can do more than that in the public sector. You can always use the public sector as a lever. I argue very, very strongly that in the public sector, we phase it in over a 5-year period. By the end of the 5-year period, no one at the top in any of the public sector gets 13 times more than the one at the bottom. I watch very senior people in the public sector get big money for doing a job and then get a bonus for doing that job. So I would cut out that completely, and the aim should be, well, I'm hoping for a socialist party to run in the first election. And if I've got anything to do with an influence among those young people that way, I'll be telling them to put that in. Put in the 13 to 1. That's the kind of thing that happens in Sweden and Norway and Denmark. And they are the most equal societies, they're not perfectly equal, but the most equal societies in this world. The UK and the United States of the development countries are the most unequal. And I noticed that some Labour politicians were arguing, oh, you get food banks in other wealthy countries. That's because the inequality is so bad. We've got a chance to change that.
I've always been a little bit confused about this distinction between a minimum wage and a living wage. If the minimum wage isn't enough to live on, why are we allowing companies to pay it? Let's use the National Investment Bank, invest in high-skilled labour, which naturally attracts high wages, because if you've got the skills, you can demand the pay. And let's bring up the entire wage and skill base of Scotland through that. Bring back manufacturing. I work with a company, we build high-tech lasers and all that equipment. It took me 9 years at uni to get to the stage where I could even start working on these things, and I still feel incredibly inadequate doing it. So it takes me about a week to build a laser. When I sell it, it costs more than your house. That's the sort of technology we can bring to Scotland if we have the will to do it.
Can I tell you what a young man got up at a meeting in Patna the other night, and he said, I'm an electrician. Can he get work in Ayrshire? I work in Aberdeen. I'm at the lower end of the electrician's scale. I get £16.50 an hour. The audience nearly fainted. That's the difference between full employment and high unemployment. And we have to have a policy that drives for full employment. Because the only thing working class people have is the ability to sell your labour, whether it's physically, mentally or intellectually. If you can't do that, and it's a high unemployed society, you're in a fix. You're at the job centre and then you're subject to sanctions if you don't like it. So the priority for the first independent government actually has to be a drive towards full employment. When you've got 100 folk chasing one job, the working class are in a very, very poor bargaining situation. When one employer is chasing 100 workers, they're in a good situation. And we're not going to make it in 2 years or anything like that. We're not talking about utopia or nirvana, but that should be the driving agenda for every working class person in this country.
We are getting towards the end of our questioning time now, so we're going to hear from this lady here first, then the lady in tangerine, then the lady in white next to her, and then we'll go to the chap at the back who's had his hand up forever and ever. We'll do those four. Please keep your questions really brief because we've only got about 5 minutes left. So, short questions, longer answers for them. Okay?
Hi, I'm Kathleen Rennie from Carluke, and I'd just like to say, would Mr Sillars let me know if Alistair Darling got back to you on your advert that was taken out in the Daily Record? The reason why I'm interested in that is because obviously the media, both newspaper and television, and some of the times have been quite unacceptable, the levels that they've arrived at, and I find it quite galling sometimes. And at least when I read that in the Daily Record, I felt as though it kind of redressed the balance of it, that you kind of gave the public, who've got a lot of questions to answer and an awful lot of things, you kind of redress things from what we're hearing from Jackie Bird, who cuts off Alex Salmond and all these other people that don't seem to kind of give the Yes campaign due respect. Thank you.
Thank you.
I thought you were doing the ball.
No, it was just...
Oh, that's no problem. No, Alistair hasn't replied. We did it quite deliberately to rattle in the morning of the debate. Because I've been in that position before, and I'd be on that platform wondering when the questions were going to come. And they were all legitimate questions. There'll be another legitimate question put in due course as well. £10,200 of a fee for a speech at an event by Sinbin, which is in fact a company operating private healthcare south of the border. There's 200 MPs and peers with actually, Alistair doesn't have any financial interest, but there's 200 of them down there who actually have financial interest in private healthcare south of the border. He didn't answer it. I like Alistair, let me tell you. My wife calls him the abominable nomad. But she still liked him. Don't worry about the media. We can't do anything about them. You know, the BBC has an instinctive bias. The newspapers are run by people, external ownership to us by and large. What they never calculated for and don't understand is that below their radar, meetings like this are happening. Can you imagine a no meeting like this? No. What's happening with this is the greatest civic movement we've ever seen. We are engaged in a mass self-education movement. I was in Port Glasgow last week, and a chap said, here's my mother coming. About a 60-year-old woman, he said, 3 months ago, just a normal, he says, she's been on that social media. He said, nobody can take her on in economics, politics, and social policy. And that's the greatest thing that's happened to Scotland. We suddenly have, outside probably of Catalonia, we are now the most politicised and best educated in economics and social policy of all the people in Western Europe. And I ken it's no our way of doing so, but you ken we should congratulate ourselves.
This is my daughter-in-law. A couple of questions ago you were mentioning about implementing the living wage in the public sector. Our question was more about the private sector, because my daughter-in-law's boss is a staunch no voter, and his main reason is he runs a very small business, employs 6 people, they're all on national minimum wage. If he has to pay them a higher wage, where does that come from?
Well, we actually had this argument when the minimum wage was introduced, that it would cost jobs. they wouldn't be able to do it, and all that sort of thing. In came the minimum wage, and it wasn't true. We have to stand up and say to employers, you cannot continue to pay wages below the level that people can find themselves able to live. We've got to be able to tell them that. And what has happened with the minimum wage was that employers found the method in which they could continue to operate their business. There's a lot of scaremongering goes on. Of course, we're sort of blackmailed. Raise the minimum wage to the living wage, and I'm sorry, you'll all have to go out the door. Is he going to close his business? Because he needs those workers. Otherwise, his business can't operate. The challenge for him is a management challenge. Your costs are going up, your labour costs are going up, the same as sometimes your material costs are going up. He doesn't tell somebody that says your material costs are going up, oh, I can't run my business any longer. He manages the company to accommodate them. So why should labour costs be so different from material costs? That's the kind of debate.
Waiting for a very long time.
It's slightly different from the minimum wage, but something that we've done within my portfolio is about trying to encourage private business to be flexible in terms of how they accommodate people trying to balance work and life. And that was a challenge for small businesses. They were finding it, they were fearful about it. But what was found is that productivity went up, morale went up, and it was a really positive thing for businesses. So I think it's about how we engage with businesses as well, about how we work with businesses to make things less scary as well for them, so that we can move forward in the direction I think we all want to. So that I think was quite a good example where people working towards
what did she say? What I'm saying is, you're saying raise the minimum wage, he's saying I can't afford it, but he gets charged every month pounds and pounds and pounds to recycle stuff, whereas we get it free in our house. So if he didn't have to pay that, you can maybe pay an extra member of staff.
And that's why the Scottish Government got rid of the small business, introduced the small business bonus to try and at least help the very smallest businesses cut through some of the red tape. And at the moment Scotland's got one of the most favourable tax regimes for small business in the rest of the UK. So we've done to try and help cut through red tape, cut through bureaucracy and help small businesses. We're going to need small businesses and entrepreneurs to allow us to provide the opportunity for people to live and work in Scotland.
You have to phase it in the private sector. We're not stupid. We know that some employers will have a genuine problem. So you phase it in so that they know what's going to happen and their business plan takes account of that. As Aileen says, the government can assist. If the Federation of Small Business comes up and says there is a specific problem, you can help solve it, then we've got the power to do that. So we're not saying to your employer, we vote on, let's say, December the 1st, 2016, and in the second you'll be paying a living wage. That's not a sensible thing to say. Over the next 5 years, it's going to be phased in. And by the way, the minimum wage will rise each year in accordance with inflation. Because if it had risen with accordance with inflation, you'd be £1,000 a year better off at the present time. Because it hasn't risen. So that's the kind of thing we say. You're phasing it in, but at the same time, the worker has to be looked after. We understand the employer might have a problem, but you've got a bigger problem. You're on the lowest wages possible.
Three examples of history. Henry Ford didn't really start selling cars until he came up with a wee idea. Why don't I pay my workers enough to be able to afford my cars? What that did, well, first, all his workers bought cars and it all the neighbours were really, really jealous. But they kept getting that high wage. They started feeding that wage into the economy. They started buying, when you're not paying all your wages just to keep your gas bill going, you can start feeding into the economy, you start buying more stuff from shops, they start making more profit, which means that they can then afford to pay their workers more. This is a rolling effect that boosts every level of the economy, especially the local economy, which I mentioned earlier.
Hello, I'm Gary from Carluke. I'd like to know, if Scotland is that much wealth when it became independent, why does immigration have to increase?
Okay, thank you. That's a nice, short question. I like that. Craig, you mentioned...
Yeah, as I said, net migration needs to increase. This does not necessarily mean bringing in immigrants. It can mean bringing back expat Scots. It can mean keeping Scottish people here, working here. But it's not a very high level. If you assume that extra 2,000 people a year, if you assume that every single one of them is not a Scottish national, not even a British national, it's an immigrant coming in, it would take, to get Scotland up to the same immigration level as the UK average, it would take 190 years. This is not a mass flood of people coming in. Anyway, we could be importing skills, we could be importing employers. Not everyone coming in will be simply content to be an employee. If 10% of these immigrants decide, I'm going to set up a business, whether it's a shop, whether it's a factory, and then they employ on average 10 people each, well, you've just employed your 2,000 people a year just from that group.
We're losing 30,000 people a year at the present time because the prospects aren't very great. If we increase our population, then there's a bigger home market. You know, there's a bigger demand for cans of beans, for hairdressers, for taxis, because there's more folk wanting those particular kind of services. I'm in favour of operating pretty much the same policy as Canada and New Zealand do, which is they look for people coming in who have something to give to the community, either their skill set or their investment. They're not talking about an open door. You can't operate an open door policy because local authorities couldn't deal with that. You have to be able to plan for schools and hospitals and all that sort of thing. But at the moment, we're snookered. There are people at our universities, and we've got some superb universities, and we've got people who go through them and get their degrees, their PhDs, and would like to stay here and can actually contribute significantly to the development of our life sciences. And under the present UK, we can't keep them. We can't keep them. So that you've got to have a sensible policy. I mean, not everybody who's an immigrant is a threat. That's the key thing. Anyway, I can't complain because the Marble Mobile has just been fixed by a Polish engineer.
Our time tonight, and I know that a few of you still have questions left to answer. I hope that you've enjoyed this evening. I would like to thank our panel amazingly because I think they've given us some great answers. And it may well be that if you still have burning questions and you want to hang on, we might be able to get you some individual answers. So thank you all very much for coming. Please.